Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
I was 9 when Uncle Robert came by. I was outside in the garage playing with our new dog, Daisy, when I heard a few loud bangs from inside the house. I saw Uncle Robert rush into a car and drive off. I ran inside to see what had happened, and I nearly stopped breathing when I saw them. My mom was lifeless, a bloody hole in her chest. My dad was gone too, with a wound where his right eye used to be. And my sister was dead as well. The bullet had struck her forehead, tearing off half the top of her head. I heard screaming, but it wasn't until later that I realized it was me. No one came to see what was wrong. No one came to investigate. I stayed there all night, holding my dead sister in my lap, not moving, not thinking. I think that night, I shed my last tears. The next morning, I laid my family out on their beds, covering them with sheets, then cleaned myself up. I packed a small backpack that fit me just right. Inside, I put underwear, socks, a knife, fork, an opener, spoon, cup, and a plastic bowl. I rolled up a gray blanket and tied it to the bottom of my pack. I discovered that Dad didn't trust banks. He had over $96,000 hidden in 2 shoeboxes labeled college funds for my sister and me. I took all the money, the .32 Colt tucked under his mattress, and took the car. Uncle Samuel had a farm up in Minnesota. He taught me how to drive the tractor while we picked rocks. Though I was big enough to drive it, I wasn't strong enough to lift the heavier rocks, so that job was his. Later, he taught me how to drive the hay wagons back to the barn when they were full. I did fine with the car, just like most farm kids would. I wrote on the wall, "Uncle Robert did this." Why? He was a quiet man with an easy smile and curly hair, the kind that women adored. Aunt Linda clearly did, having 2 boys with him, Terry and Paul. Then I left. I had to sit on a stack of books taped together to see where I was going and taped blocks to the pedals to control the gas and brake. I drove west, sticking to back roads. I lived off oatmeal and canned peaches, filling the gas tank whenever I could and buying a gallon of water. I used the station bathrooms to do what I needed and clean up a little. I parked in parking lots with other cars nearby to sleep. I realized that I should have taken another shirt and pair of pants before I left. I needed something to change into so I could do my laundry. I spent a few dollars at a Sears store in Salina, Oklahoma, for a shirt, pants, and a pair of boots. I bought a jacket that looked sturdy and a cap too. I washed up in a laundromat bathroom while my new clothes washed. Then I washed my dirties. I found a newspaper on a table in the laundromat. It was a couple of days old, but that was okay. Oh, there I was on the 3rd page. It was last year's school picture. All I could do was to keep on the way I had been. I was suddenly glad to have that baseball cap. The coat made me look bigger too. I remember Dad would check the water and oil before going up to Uncle Samuel's. This trip had been a lot longer than that, so I figured I'd best check them. Yep, the car was down 2 quarts of oil, and the radiator could use half a gallon. The old Ford Galaxy got me to Boise, Idaho before it got tired. I took off the license plates before leaving it. I got a good night's sleep before I packed up. I found a roadway bus stop and bought a ticket for Los Angeles. The people waiting for the bus didn't look any too promising as travel companions. I stopped into a hardware store for a sheath knife and some snacks. They had towels, heavy tape, and plastic wrap too. I bundled up most of my money in plastic and wrapped it in a couple of towels. The peanuts, a fruit drink, and other stuff went on top. I taped that big buck knife to the left side of my belt so that it didn't hang down. You have to give those buck people credit, they don't sell dull knives. That pack didn't leave my side. And when I relaxed to sleep, I kept the backpack strap wound around my arm. I woke up with a big guy tugging on the strap. He said in a low voice, "Give it up, kid, and you won't get hurt." I wasn't about to give anything up. Damn it. I pulled that big buck knife and stuck it deep in his belly, all the way to the guard. He made a whoop noise and went to punch me. I stabbed him again, higher. He wheezed and folded over. That took all the fight right out of him. I used 1 foot to shove him over and into the passageway between the seats. I was happy that he crawled away. I used some napkins that I'd taken from a diner to clean up the knife real good, then stuffed them between the seat and the side of the bus. After I put my knife away, I went back to sleep. At the next stop, an old lady got on the bus. She sat down next to me. She gave me the eye, then started knitting something, rocking back and forth all the while. After a while, she asked, "You going to your folks? They got killed." She scowled at me. "You do it? Why would I want to kill my mom and pop and my little sister?" I turned up my arms. I held her all night. She was cold, dead. There wasn't a thing I could do, so I ran. I didn't have anything else to say. She patted my shoulder. "You done what you had to." She looked at me for a while, not smiling, not frowning. "You can stay with me if you want. I got a place north of Vegas. This God's own a-hole called Copper Springs, Nevada. I raised some food for market. You wouldn't have lived on a farm, would you?" She looked hopeful. I nodded fast. "My uncle has a dairy farm in Minnesota. I helped pick rocks, bale hay, drive a tractor, scoop cow. He'll do whatever for a place to stay." She smiled and leaned back. "Good. If you can work with your hands, we'll do what together." It was only May 3rd when we got out of that bus. But by damn, it was hot. The air hit me in the face like a towel fresh out of the dryer. Old Irene had the butt end of a cattle ranch that Shed inherited from her folks. The ranch house was made of stone and thick timbers, so it was both easy to heat and keep cool. She was an only child, so nobody else but the government wanted a cut of it. She had an old decrepit central pivot walking irrigator making a big circle. It kicked out jets of water every so often as the wheels crept around in a circle 24 hours a day, driven by water pressure. "We've got one hell of a deep well here," Irene told me. It was pounded in during the late 40s, just after the war. The deep water levels were low. They had to go searching for it. The water's cold and sweet. I sat on a tractor a lot. She had an old International harvester with a 4-bottom cultivator. It was small enough to go under the walking wheel while I chewed up the weeds. Everything was planted with the same distance between the rows so that the tractor and implements wouldn't crush any of the crops. If I wasn't on the tractor, then I was taking care of it. Irene had one other person on the farm. His name was Sid. He did a lot of repairs and did the cooking. He grinned and slapped my back. "I'm glad you're here, kid. Keeps my ass out of that tractor seat." I had a nice room to myself, but I had to keep it clean. The bathroom, too. Irene said, "I'm too old to be cleaning up after a young un. You do what you know you should, and he'll take care of the rest." She did, too. She kept me fed and in clothes, which made me worry if she was going to kick me out. But no, she kept me. I even got to ride to school. It wasn't much of a school, but it was local. I didn't have to ride a bus 35 miles both ways to get to Las Vegas and back every day. I didn't make any friends. They seemed to take one look at my eyes and gave it up as a bad job. I went to school, listened in class, did my lessons, and went home. The field house was filled with migrant workers, and the front yard was filled with pickup trucks, beat-up cars, and campers for about a month every fall when the crops came in during the harvest. Big trucks came every day to haul away flats of vegetables until the fields were bare. Then, like the sun blowing away a fog, everyone was gone. But Irene, Sid, and me. Afterwards, I plowed under most of the garden, except where the root vegetables lay for our own eating. After being out in the sun so much, if it weren't for my short blonde crew cut, I'd have looked just like the migrants, except for my gray eyes. When I got a little bigger, I got a .22 rifle for Christmas. Proud. Damn, I was proud of that thing. I did my best to bring in rabbits for dinner too. Sid wouldn't take them unless I skinned and cleaned them first, though. Then the damn gophers moved in. I hammered together some little 8-foot towers just outside the irrigator path. I was up in those things before daylight, before school, and all through the summer. Irene looked at me funny when I kept asking for more .22 rounds, but she bought them. Slowly but surely, our gopher problems went away. When I was 16, Irene started paying me $120 a month. "You've got to learn how to handle money, Al." I didn't spend any of it. I put it away with the rest. I learned how Irene scheduled the plantings so that all the crops wouldn't come in at one time. That way, the migrants had a chance to harvest it all before it went bad in the field. They could only do so much a day. I saw small deer early in the morning. I filled my wallet full of bills and asked Sid to take me to town the next time he went shopping. "What you after, Al?" Rifle. Saw some deer. Okay. What kind of rifle? Savage bolt action .22 Magnum. That'll do her. We'll get you taken care of, then go pick up the groceries. It seemed like that rifle knew what I wanted to hit from the first time I fired it. During sunset and sunrise, the javelina and the mule deer came down from the hills to visit the vegetable gardens and the wheat fields near town. It wasn't but a few seasons before I had the rear of the field house filled with tacked-up skins. There was a place in the city that would buy them. Sid and I went in about 4 times a year with the trunk of his car packed full of dried hides. Kept me in clothes, boots, ammunition, and school fees, plus a little to put away. Irene asked how much I got per hide. The next day she was mad. She was fuming. She made me go to another place to sell them. Boy, was I glad to. I made more than 4 times what I had been making. I was saving over $5,000 a year from my hunting. We ate the javelinas and the deer carcasses. The cats, I skinned them and left them for the wild dogs. I did my best to keep up the fence around the property. We had right around 1,200 acres. I didn't want to use up that poor tractor, so I hefted a military pack frame with a shelf to hold a spool of wire, a pair of gloves, a box of staples, and a pair of stapling pliers. It went pretty slow at first as I walked the fence. Then I did better and better. After a while, I had this shuffle thing going that just ate up the distance. It got so I could chug over the fence line in a morning. Sid took the truck around it once to check the distance with the truck's odometer. Came out to about 28 miles. I just kept picking them up and putting them down until the job was over. After I graduated high school, I got my diploma and my driver's license. Irene sat me down after dinner one day. So, you gonna go find your uncle and settle his hash? I motioned for her to wait a minute. I went to my room to get an envelope that I'd been putting together. There was a newspaper article titled, "Robert Callahan arrested for murder. He'd been shagging my wife." The victim, Harold Mitchell, had been living with his longtime partner, James Franklin, for over 9 years. Mr. Franklin reported the crime. State police had opened several cold cases involving Robert Callahan. Irene put down the article. "So, you got it out of your system?" I shook my head and looked out the window at the bleak landscape. "Afraid not. I've got too much unforgiveness built up inside. Wrong time, wrong place, and it'll be a storm. Safer here. Safer for me, safer for others." "How about Sid and me?" Hell, Irene. I'm your dog and you know it. I'd hold still for it if you felt you had to put me down." She put her head down on her arms on the kitchen table. "Dear Lord, guide me in the tasks you set before me." She peered at me like she was looking for gold flakes through quartz. "You've been taking critter hides right and left. With a few college courses under your belt, we might get you a good-paying job as a state game warden. You know tracking, boy." I shook my head. "I know a couple of Paiute guys that'll teach me tracking for a good supply of mule deer for the local tribe." "Do it. With that under your belt and some good desert training by the tribes, you'll be a shoo-in. Come Monday, let's see what you'll need for classes to qualify. The ranger station should know. That's how I got started. I found a couple of college grants for orphans and low-income farms. I had to move on to the University of Nevada, Reno campus as a freshman. All the reading I did in school did me well. I tested out pretty high and even managed to test out of a Spanish college course. I worked a lot with the migrants and even read the local Spanish newspaper. I found a used pickup at a rancher sale. It looked like hell, but on lifting the hood, I smiled. Someone had been taking care of it. I put in my bid and picked up an '88 Chevy Silverado crew cab. Long bed, half-ton for $750. It looked like 5 miles of bad road, but it sure ran and rode sweet. I talked to the campus maintenance supervisor. I let him know that I was used to working for a living and would appreciate finding a nice cool basement room somewhere in return for whatever he needed doing. He scratched his head a while and sat back. "You look likely enough. Where you worked?" "Up by Copper Springs. An irrigated truck garden." He grinned. "You've been working for Dirty Irene?" I began to get mad. "You don't call Irene that around me or we're gonna have words." I about climbed over his desk to adjust his necktie. "Now hold on there, fella." He backpedaled as fast as he could. "I didn't mean nothing by it." I stared him down. "Well, I did. We better not have anything more to say unless I pound you into the ground like a fence post, mister. I walked out. I found a furniture store that I could talk into hiring me on as a live-in night watchman. He had a line on a little travel trailer that he pulled into this goddamned enormous receiving bay. He hooked up the sewer, water, and electric, then made sure the air would circulate to the outside through a big louvered fan. I got a copy of the keys and $110 a week. He got a night watchman and a $1,200 a month break on his insurance. We both made out like bandits. The university about shat when I found housing outside of their dormitories. But I made an appointment to speak with the dean of students and dressed up in my good suit. When I told him my story of woe, I was shocked. He sat back and smiled. Son, you hooked up with Irene's place? Yes, sir. Up by Copper Springs with Sid. She took me in as an orphan when I was 9. She wants me to take the courses I need to be a game warden. I'm thinking maybe state police even. I have to keep away from the campus maintenance supervisor, or there's going to be blood spilled. Ain't nobody calling her Dirty Irene in my hearing and getting away undamaged. Hell, I got plenty of desert, a diamond point shovel, and I know how to use it. Now take it easy, son. I don't have anything but respect for Irene. Well, that's what I want to hear. But y'all keep Simon's crew yaps shut, or there's going to be a few mysterious disappearances in your maintenance staff. I shook his hand and left. Oh Christ, Irene's done raised a Marine. The telephone lines had quite a bit more traffic than normal that night. I didn't feel right unless I got some good exercise every morning. Most days I woke up early, loaded up a pack full of gallon water bottles, and ran around the college track until I ran out of steam. It was a lot more boring than running the fence line, but it was some 60 miles closer. Just like in high school, I attended my classes, did my homework, took my tests, and went home. Friends? I had no friends. I felt lost that I didn't have any chores to do after school. The store manager caught me out after school, looking for something to do. He took me into the office and showed me the scheduling system for the warehouse. Say, you want to load and unload these trucks according to the clipboards on this tree? They'll pay you for it. How much? I watched him start to get squirrely. You know I've been nothing but straight up with you. He snorted and screwed up his face. All right, damn it. I pay 2 guys $9 an hour each for an hour to load or unload a truck. That's $18 a truck. I'll pay you in cash. Somebody's got to teach me to back up and navigate these big semis, or am an accident waiting to happen. Good man. Better you bring it up now than after an insurance hit. Come Saturday, I'll come in and show you all you need to know. I grew up doing everything here. We shook hands and grinned. That Saturday, I learned how to hook up, back, and park a semi-trailer, how to operate a forklift, and how to read a warehouse docket. I unloaded and reloaded between 4 and 7 trailers a night before going to bed. That was some nice cash. I used the college computers to investigate what jobs were out there for people with my skills. Remarkably, the game wardens were harder to get into than the state troopers. I changed the focus of my courses to criminal justice and did ride-alongs with the local police, even though it cut into my income. I did some evening EMT night courses. I did a little speed work on the running track and worked on my military PT. The summer between my first and second year, I learned tracking. I told them I was going into the state police and needed to be able to track people. Boy, did that change what they taught me. Nobody caught me sleeping ever again. They taught me to look at nothing and see everything. That was damned hard. I couldn't do it until they slipped me some peyote. After a while, it became a habit. Whenever I walked into a place, I saw all of it. They had me start drawing, sketching, putting down what I'd seen. The winter before I graduated, I bought a Glock 31. 357 SIG semi-automatic pistol. I spent a lot of bench time working on my target recognition and accuracy, no matter what my posture. Standing, squatting, turning, lying prone on my back. It didn't matter. I wanted to hit what I aimed at, even if I were tossed into a corner and had my legs broken. I graduated college with high marks. I interviewed to get into the state troopers. I went through the academy at 21. By 22, I learned how political the job was. I hated that. Instead, I applied for an interview with the U.S. Marshal Service to be a deputy. I passed the competition ladder and went to Georgia for their school. They had videotape courses on how to do everything, including how to take a shower and tie your shoes. Watch a movie, take a test. Watch a movie, take a test. Wash, rinse, repeat. Some movies I went back to watch 2 and 3 times because I knew I had missed things. I kept on it until I ran out of movies. Then they partnered me on missions. My silence unnerved my trainer. What? Don't you want to ask anything? No. I figure if you want me to know something, you'll tell me. If you screw up and don't tell me, it'll be your fault, not mine. Then I hunt you down. He looked at me like a rabbit looks at an owl. I got a different trainer after that. He talked me through a lot of stuff, what he knew about each job, what to expect, what each bad guy was like, and what he had done before. I got more and more armed and dangerous retrievals. My success rate was pretty high. Once the runners saw me over the barrel of my gun, all the fight just went out of them. I asked one of the more dangerous ones why he gave up. He said, "You're a stone-cold killer. I could see it in your eyes." I didn't have a chance. I spent over 10 years in the field bringing back runners. Some into Canada, some into Mexico, some in the back hills of Montana or Maine. I didn't care. I brought them back, usually alive. I always lived frugally. The service paid for all my running around on the job. I had a uniform allowance and a PDM budget while on the road. All I paid for was apartment rent, electricity, insurance, and food. I socked away the money. The psychologists didn't want me in the field anymore. The service had to listen to them. They discharged me with a medical. I was left without direction. No military or police would hire me with the psych profile I had. I bought a Dodge Charger police package off the government surplus website. It didn't seat 5, so the model was remaindered out. It had low mileage, and the garage checked it out for me. I signed my separation papers and went back to Nevada. It wasn't exactly legal, but I handed in an older ID I had and kept my current one. Irene had died while I was gone. I drove up the driveway to a picture of desolation. The ranch was closed up. The irrigation pump was turned off. The fields were dry. The desert had made inroads into recovering the property. I went to the county courthouse to find out what had happened to the place. Irene had willed it to me and not said a word. I guess she cared for me like I had cared for her. I found a note in the file that her lawyer had the deed to the property, the keys, access to an account with some money in it, and a letter for me. I made an appointment to pay him a visit. Irene's account had been paying off the property tax the last 4 years, so the place was out of hock when she died. The lawyer had a cleaning service go through the place, empty the refrigerator, then he pulled the breakers and locked the place up. I got the power turned back on and the phone too. I bought a new vacuum cleaner and some cleaning supplies. I unlocked the gate and swung it open, then drove through. The sun was high. The wind never stopped blowing. It parched your lips in minutes and blew a constant bitter grit everywhere. I unlocked the ranch house and walked in. Familiar sights and smells came crashing down around me. If anywhere was home to me, this was it. I dropped my suitcase near the door and shut it behind me. In the near gloom, I raised the shades and pulled open the curtains as I walked through the place, headed for the back porch, where the electrical service panel sat. I opened all the breakers, then threw in the main. The service panel light turned on, meaning the power company had done their job. I started throwing on breakers one by one, bypassing the irrigation pump and the machine shed circuits. I'd have to see what condition things were in before I tried those. I heard the compressors come on in the kitchen and the bigger one outside in the air conditioner. The place had central air. I cut off the air conditioner circuit and went outside with a broom and a screwdriver. I wanted to clear the filters before I got it running. It wasn't but a 20-minute job to get rid of the dirt and mouse nests. Then the cooler air started coming out of the vents. I turned the water pump on. I heard coughing and spitting coming out of the sink and the bathrooms. The toilets were filling. I turned off the sinks when the traps had filled and ran some water in the showers to fill those traps too. I dug out a 5-year-old jar of instant coffee and put a pot of water on the stove to heat. Nothing. No gas. I tried the phone and got a dial tone. The propane company's number was written down in the front of the phone book. I gave them a call to see if they were still in business. Yep, they were. I ordered 600 gallons to fill the tank. That meant no hot water either. Damn it. Well, I'd be all right until tomorrow. I drove the 45 miles into Vegas to get dinner and a place for the night. I arranged for a cleaning service to go through the house the next morning. It would be cool enough inside by then, so I got a 10 a.m. appointment. I drove to town where I bought detergent for the washer, a cheap cell phone linked to the house number, and a room at a budget in cheap and clean. Then, showing my federal ID, I bought a pair of new rifles, a good pistol, a bolt-action goose gun, and a pump-action shotgun. I bought a holster for the pistol, lots of ammunition, and several cleaning kits with Hoppa's No. 9 and dry lube. When it came down to choices for my new rifles, I bought a Savage .22 Magnum bolt-action with iron sights and a Browning A-bolt in 7mm Remington Magnum with a Redfield 3-12X low-light scope. I'd used one in the service and had made friends with it. For a pistol, it was back to the Glock 22 for me. Vegas being Vegas. I also bought a poncho to cover everything in the back seat that didn't fit in the trunk. I had a nice dinner, then took the Glock into the hotel room with me, along with some rags and a cleaning kit, to give it a good working over. Then I worked on the shoulder holster. When I was happy, I tucked it away and went to bed. Bright and early, I dressed in a formal suit to hide my shoulder rig and went to breakfast. I'd forgotten what Las Vegas was like in the morning. 6 a.m. was no different than 6 p.m. Before heading back to the ranch, I stopped by the Clark County Sheriff's Office to see if they were accepting applications. I knew it was kind of an iffy proposition with my psych profile, but I'd never shot an unarmed man. I'd never shot first unless a civilian was being threatened, and I'd been in the field almost constantly for 10 years retrieving prison escapees and federal runners. I picked up an application. The commander had the local union stuck in his craw and was about to do a little union busting. He was frantically beating the bushes to replace his troops while providing services for the population. It looked like I was a shoo-in, at least temporarily. By 2 p.m. that day, I had gas for the kitchen and water heater. The cleaning service had run through the place like a white tornado, and my washing machine was working its mechanical heart out, cleaning the bedding and curtains. The rugs were rolled up, ready to take to town to be cleaned. I spent most of the afternoon in the machine shed with a big fan blasting air around, tossing the dust in swirling devils. There was an air compressor in there, hooked up to 220 volts to operate a rack full of tools and a nice manual hydraulic ram kit, very close to a Jaws of Life kit that I had practiced with. That reminded me, I needed to write to the federal offices to get a copy of my certifications, my scores, and their completion dates. Hopefully, I'd be given credit through the Nevada training facility. The tractor was dead. It looked like they'd been starting it with a gasoline donkey engine fitted to the front of the drive shaft. That was dangerous as hell. I needed a new tractor. The implements needed refurbishment but were otherwise in decent shape. The planter was done for, though. There really wasn't a local newspaper that wasn't all glamour and glitz, being this close to Las Vegas. Nothing for the farmers. I had to take a trip to the AG Co-op elevator to see if there were any postings for used equipment or auctions on the board. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a Vegas radio station playing. I wrote to get a copy of my records, then took out my bank books to check my balances. I carried half a duffel bag full of cash around with me that got dropped during a narcotics bust. I found it during the final area sweep. 4 other teams had passed it by. So, I considered it providence that it landed in my lap. It was time to count it. I started laying out piles of bundles, hundreds, 50s, 20s, and 10s. Came out to 45 straps of 100s, 25 straps of 50s, 8 straps of 20s, 12 straps of 10s. A little scratching on my notepad gave a figure of $537,000. Quite a little nest egg. From then on, I'd have to pay cash for whatever I could. Things like fuel and bills had to be from accountable funds. I'd been through courses tracking counterfeiters and narcotics money and knew how not to leave signs. Some tanks of gas, some grocery runs, and such had to be made with clean money too. Everyone had those expenditures and they had to show up. Finally, I got down to the letter Irene left me. Dear Al, I'd sure like to be a fly on the wall when you got the news about the ranch going to you. I hope you enjoy living on the place and don't sell it off. There's a box full of warranty papers and whatnot in my bedroom closet. Pay attention to the irrigator contract. It's got a long time to go yet. Be careful cleaning out my bedroom when you go through it. I've been a pack rat for a long, long time. Love you, kid. Irene Rudd Lawrence, I didn't know whether to cry or smile, so I did both. Old Irene did right by me even to the end. The next day, I got a call from the sheriff's office. I was requested to report to the head office at 8 a.m. I showed up bright and early, ready for anything. They had run a background check and gotten back a list of my certifications. The state governor had signed off on the cross-posting. A box containing captain's bars sat on the desk in front of me, along with a cased badge. I looked up into the smiling face of the Clark County Sheriff. Where do I sign? My new boss held out his hand for a shake. We've got to get you straight on the uniform and your duties. We're breaking this department away from the union until they can get it through their skulls that we determine if an officer gets put on paid leave, unpaid leave, or fired at our discretion. Not that of the goddamn union. I was voted into this office, not the goddamn union president or his flunkies. I said, arrest them for interference with an officer, obstructing justice, and interfering with a law enforcement case. When their lawyers come in to get them released, search every one of them for firearms. If they're carrying on the premises, then they're automatically guilty. Put them away. If a judge objects, have him censured by the State Judicial Conduct Board. If it goes any higher, call the FBI. Sheriff Gillespie got a hunted look on his face. From your lips to God's ears. He called in his secretary to get me signing paperwork and put me on the payroll while he started making phone calls. Once the door to his office closed, his secretary asked me, what just happened? The sheriff was too close to the problem to see the answer. I just opened his eyes a little. After a storm of paperwork got put under control, I was shown an office with a ratty desk and rolling chair. I took one look and smelled the money tree. I cornered a secretary and asked a few questions. Who's in charge of finances? Internal assets. That'd be Jerry Morgan in accounting. And where can I get a copy of the last few years' budget breakdowns? That's all on the computer. I can print copies if you want. I nodded. Please. Now, is Brother Jerry in the office? He leaned over to me and said in a low voice, him? You'd think he was on the golf team. He's never here. I smiled. I love the smell of corruption in the morning. It smells like victory. I found an emergency fire evacuation sign that showed me where my office was, then went down to the main desk to do a little bullshitting. I flashed my federal ID. Special Investigator Sims. Please take me to the accounting department. I was talking to the CPA within 10 minutes. We pulled budgetary records for internal allotments dating back 8 years, along with the documented expenses drawing down on those allotments. When the accounts payable records were researched to find records of those checks, nothing could be found. There weren't even folders in evidence. The money had evaporated. Still, the requisitions were there, and they were signed by good old Brother Jerry Morgan. I lightly asked the accountant, what does this look like to you? A repeated pattern of grand theft. I said, yep, and malfeasance of office. Let's get the keys to Brother Jerry's office and see if he's a stupid thief. Well, he wasn't stupid. His office was clean. On the strength of the evidence and my new position, I went before a sitting judge to get a search warrant for Brother Jerry's place and a writ to freeze all his assets. I took 5 officers with me to the better side of town, where we executed that warrant. We went in teams of 2, photographing everything where it lay, then taking pictures of each page of the ledgers we found. I called in 4 more officers to drive around to several banks to freeze Brother Jerry's accounts. Then our wandering golfer was brought in and arrested. He was properly Mirandized and locked in the pokey. When a union rep and 2 lawyers showed up at my desk to try and take a bite out of my ass, making noises like you just don't understand how things work around here, I had them frisked for weapons. Now, why would a union rep and his lawyers have holsters and pistols? Well, they didn't have them for long. That was a federal rap. I personally made sure that they were properly Mirandized and recorded on tape before they went into solitary holding cells. With the evidence in hand, the sheriff went to the state's attorney. He got a judge to allow a hearing to be scheduled the next week. Old Jerry spent the next 15 years at Lovelock with no parole. The budget got about half its money back, $3.6 million. It took until Christmas, but I finally got new office furniture. The garage got a new lift, 2 tow trucks, and tools. I got assigned to a nice patrol car out of the deal too. Next, I reviewed employment records, time and grade, pay grades, duty schedules, and mandatory training certificates. Out of 2,500 deputies, a third were behind on training, and more than half hadn't qualified on the range in over a year. It might seem like I had made a lot of enemies, but I also questioned why another group of deputies hadn't received a pay increase in over 2 years. Where was their union representation? Likely slacking off somewhere instead of doing their job. Things fall apart, and that's when people like me step in to fix them. The sheriff came down to pay me a visit my second week. I had just turned up the payroll and staff record problems. It must have just hit his desk. He sat in my ratty visitor's chair and winced when it bit him in the ass. Then he grinned again. "You're a mean little stirrer, aren't you?" I know my grin looked dangerous. It had helped me in more than one interrogation. Yep, I'll kick a turd with steel-toed boots just to see the flies shaken out. You'll see some dead wood on the staff with this records thing. So don't be alarmed at seeing some holes in your roster. If I were you, I'd be wearing a vest outside the building too. That reminded me, I needed a housekeeper. The job was going to make huge demands on my hours. I had the room and could afford it. I needed a cook and housekeeper. I had the bitter end of a ranch up in Copper Springs. Even 2 people could live there. There was an old rotary irrigation system under warranty. I could get it shortened a bit and grow enough just for me and a few others. Maybe buy a few head of steer to feed up and put in a chicken house. This job's going to chew me up if I try to do it all on my own. The sheriff nodded. Smart. You're only 31. You can get something long-term out of it too. I slowly shook my head. You know what federal recovery work does to your head after 10 years on the road? It's like I've been in combat. I need to unwind a couple of years first. Damn, I wish we could get a hold of half those training films you got qualified with. You're the best prepared officer on the force. Still, you're gonna need some downtime to get your house in order. Tell you what, take a week, even 2. Come back when you've got some staff and the flames die down around here. Thanks, Sheriff. I need a tractor and some tools too. It's late for auction season. But some folks are getting out of the business before the end of the year. I'll head down to the AG Co-op to see if I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I left my patrol car in the shop and drove out to the old grain mill. That's where the ammonia tanks were stored by the railroad siding. The notices board had a few things that interested me. I found an ad from an agricultural Ford dealership. I called them to come out to the ranch to pick up the old tractor and implements. He had a flatbed and a day cab tractor that would do the trick. I took a trip out to see what he had in stock. He had a well-kept John Deere 730, with good tires and a fresh tune-up. Someone had put some time and effort into it. The front wheels ran in the same tracks as the rear wheels, and all 4 of them matched the wheel span of the attachments. He wanted $12,500 for it. I offered $8,000 cash, delivered now. Now that he got the idea, I had him look at my plow and cultivator with an eye toward rebuilding them. I also priced out a sickle bar mower and a used seeder. I made sure the seeder had the right discs to plant a vegetable garden. Then I paid the man. I went back to the AG Co-op to talk to the guys hanging around. I introduced myself and shook hands around. After a while, I described the pickle I was in. The guys talked back and forth for a while, bringing up names I'd never heard of. Finally, what about Jamie? He's still around? What about Gloria? Yep, still nagging him to death, too. One of the younger guys there said, Jamie's Mexican and Gloria's Swedish. They had a passel of kids on a pecan farm in California, then moved down here to retire. Be damned if they didn't miss farming. They've been looking for a small hold for ages. Well, give them a call. I've got to clean the place up some, but the ranch house is clean and air-conditioned. I'll take them out for a good meal at a casino. Then, if it all works out, I'll invite them out to the place tomorrow. If it doesn't work out, no hurt, no foul. They nodded all around. Good idea. Nobody gets bent out of shape. Nobody gets hurt. I picked up a small, cheap wheelbarrow that would fit in the trunk of my car. I had dinner, bought a dozen small boxes at U-Haul, and went home. My letter from Irene said to be careful when cleaning out her bedroom. That meant to me that she had something hidden in there. I carefully went through the entire room, examining everything. I stripped the bed, removed the mattress, patted down the box spring and examined the frame. The bedside stand held no surprises, other than a sawed-off shotgun. The dresser had big envelopes filled with stock certificates taped to the bottoms of the drawers. I kept going. When I started in on her closet, I about filled my drawers. Every shoe had a roll of 20s shoved up near the toe. There were 8 purses hanging up, and they were stuffed with straps of hundreds. 4 hat boxes were also stuffed with straps of hundreds. Good God! I wiped my hand over my mouth. What else was here? Irene was a cunning old bird. What would someone miss if they were robbing the place? I sighed and walked over to the jewelry box. It looked like costume stuff. I opened the box under a bright light and began inspecting the mounts. Sure. Costume stuff. Costume jewelry wasn't signed. 2 pieces were marked Tiffany Studios as well. Irene, you were a dirty, dirty girl. I wondered how she made it all. Was she a Cold War spy? Did she work the brothel? I didn't know and refused to ask. I let it remain a mystery. I needed a place to keep all this stuff. Courts could order safety deposit boxes opened. Safes? Not so much. I ordered a high-security safe to be installed next to the fireplace, covered with a bookshelf. It took 3 carpenters, 2 masons, and 4 movers to get that thing embedded in reinforced concrete. Then I felt secure. As a deputy, I had seen some freaky security setups. One guy had a double safe, a small walk-in safe with a liner of 4-inch thick nickel steel inside, that sat raised up on blocks so there was 2 inches clear all around it. He packed 20 pounds of Semtex between the safe and the liner. If you didn't reach up and turn off the switch after 2 minutes, that thing was designed to blow and shoot the liner across the room like a cannon shell, smashing the hell out of anyone or anything in its way. Like a hydraulic ram. Brutal. I stored the cash in there, along with Irene's jewelry. I had a few meters of det cord and some blasting caps that I carried around, left over from my recovery days. I stashed those away too. Jamie and Gloria were an old bickering couple who had been there and done that. He knew irrigation. She knew housekeeping and how to keep the books. I talked chickens and a couple of calves. Their eyes lit up. I hired them on the spot. I bought Jamie a new pickup and got the irrigation contractor to come out and remove a couple of pipe lengths from the spray line. We planted a late clover crop to condition the soil and boost nitrogen levels. The background clatter of the irrigator took me back to my childhood on the ranch. It was an amazingly comforting sound. It put me to sleep at night and brought back welcome memories as I woke each day. It put me in the mood to run around the property line before showering and dressing each day. I checked the fences like I did as a youth and watched for animal tracks. It had been my job before and was once again. I went back to work, knowing that the ranch would be cared for and dinner would be waiting when I got home. My coworkers mentioned that I seemed calmer. I finally received my uniforms from the tailor. I had credit for several ribbons concerning difficult recoveries and civilian defensive operations. I drew a service handgun, properly cleaned it, then made friends with it on the pistol range. I had to order an A-Bolt 7mm with a Redfield scope because none were in the armory. Everybody else liked their P5S, which were spray-and-pray weapons as far as I was concerned. I brought along a couple of beefy guys to learn how to shoot a Garand M1 in .30-06. As they got better, I ordered a couple of .50 caliber rifles so that our crew could take out armored cars or helicopters. As they got better, I ordered a couple of .50 caliber rifles so that our crew could take out armored cars or helicopters. I knew that I was qualified to shoot a Stinger, but nobody else on the team was, except the sheriff. That wasn't enough to justify the expense. You didn't buy just one Stinger, you bought 4. At $38,000 each, that would have made one hell of a dent in the budget. We'd have to do some major narcotic money busts to afford it. I also wanted us to have some armored transports. A pair of APCs with .50 caliber machine guns would go a long way toward keeping the troopers safe and soothing my soul. Doug had certifications in using Anfo slurry, Semtex, or C4. That took a load off my mind. It decentralized some of our training and was a good skill for a large department to have. If we had to take down a house or blow a security door, we had the means. A good third of our field troops had high-speed driving courses. We needed more bucks to add to our proficiencies and to keep them up. For example, one man burned through 4 tires, worth $250 each, during a high-speed pursuit or an escape and evasion refresher. I dressed down and visited a few of the local reservations. I promised to take in up to 10 couples on my ranch if they gave up hardcore narcotic runners. I didn't give a damn about pot or hash. I wanted the big guys. We didn't have the traffic that Texas, Arizona, or New Mexico did, but we had our share. An old native guy turned state's evidence for us. I moved him lock, stock, and barrel to the ranch, then set up a Tin Man operation to catch our runner. It was a pottery shipment from Monterrey, Mexico. The big jugs held over 10 kilos each, and the shipment had 240 big pottery jugs. It was a start. It sure dried up the local suppliers. We ran monitoring operations on crack houses to determine the distribution patterns that the narcotic came in. Then we busted the distributors. We added a few million to the operating budget that way. Narcotics labs were vest pocket operations and were hard to eliminate. Only perseverance and bloody-mindedness served to close them down. Our best operation came from a trooper's wife that religiously watched a cable TV show, Breaking Bad. We paid a couple of college chemists to identify meth precursor chemicals, how they were industrially used, and who would have them. We turned those warehouses into baited traps. Nobody got in or out without a damn good reason and 2 days' notice. Bingo. After a few interceptions, the traffic went back down to nickel and dime stuff. Then we had to watch for meth coming in over the state lines. We advised other sheriff's departments and law enforcement agencies about our actions. Some had that not invented here disease, but the rest cooperated. The California ATF actually impounded a chemical tanker with 1/4 of its cargo tanks holding meth feedstock. I guess I was too effective. After 4 years of causing trouble for people who thought laws were for other people, my employment became a political football. The sheriff had to let me go. He had a hard time looking me in the eye as he asked for my badge and weapon. However, I didn't say a thing. Lesson number 1. Life is not fair. On leaving the building, I was blocked by 3 news crews. What does it feel like being fired from a ranking position in the county sheriff's office? I looked the idiot reporter in the eye and said, "I'm a private citizen now and don't have to play pretty anymore." While being recorded by the others, I yanked the camera out of the hands of the closest cameraman, unscrewed the lens, spit into it, and screwed it back on. Then I handed it back to him. Get a shot of his face. I just totally disrespected his equipment because of what the news services, broadcast. That's what happened to me. Your disrespect for me and the job I've been doing got me fired. Screw off. That's what it feels like. I buelled through them to get to my car and drove off. I made a stop at a hardware store for some wire and no trespassing signs. I called home to see if Jamie or Gloria needed anything from town. I made a short run through the grocery store to fill Gloria's list and drove back to the ranch. Took me most of the morning to do my run. The next day, I went out with a backpack full of signs, a spool of heavy brass wire, a pair of pliers, and gloves. I got the entire fence line posted every quarter mile. Though Henry, our stool pigeon, decided to move to the other end of the state, where his cousin had a sheep ranch, I bought him a used pickup truck and gave him $4,000 for his trouble. Hell, he left in better shape than when he arrived. I kept doing my morning thing and spent a lot of time helping with the garden. Now that I had the time to help, I hired a couple of day laborers to help me reattach a segment onto the irrigator. One pipe segment roughly doubled the area under irrigation. I planted the new fields in straight clover and made a cash deal for a used old-style cube hay baler that was small enough for our tractor to operate. I needed a hay wagon too. I had a small hay barn put up, made out of poles and galvanized steel. A long, low cattle barn, made out of double-wall pole barn sections with a double roof to keep the interior from being an oven, was cheaper than I thought it would be. I had it wired for lights and had a concrete floor poured so we could scrape the manure out of it. I put in stations for feeding and watering inside the barn and at the corners of the property. I had stock tanks installed before buying any cattle. Before bringing in any stock, I hired a company to run a fence line across the property, separating the stock operation from the house and garden. I had a cattle gate buried at the entrance so that no animals would get across, even if the gate were left open. A cattle gate is made up of 4 to 6 inch heavy pipes laid across the opening. Cattle won't cross them because it hurts their hooves. Jamie and I figured out where to put the chicken house, then marked out the foundation. I used the front-end loader on the tractor to scoop out the dirt, then called in a concrete truck to pour the foundation. The chicken house wouldn't require much load, so I didn't bother with rebar reinforcement. We took our time with chalk lines and a level, laying concrete block walls. We positioned the chicken yard right up against the edge of the irrigator path, so that some of the overspray would keep the ground moist enough to at least grow weeds. I made sure to put up a few sunshades for the poor scumsuckers too. Once I thought about it, I bought a couple of cheap kiddie wading pools. I emptied and refilled them once a week, or at least one of us did. Dumping the water made for more green spots. Moving those wading pools was the highlight of the week for the chickens. The grubs and worms underneath got exposed for the birds. A guy from the UNLV AG Extension office convinced me to bury some seep lines for passive irrigation and put in strip fields of feed. It used less water, and I didn't have to cut feed for the stock every day. I just turned them out on one of the two fields. When one got ragged, they got switched. I only ran 50 head, but it meant some nice coin every fall when they went to the butcher. When the cattle got shipped, I cut and baled the fields. That way, I also made some money on the baled clover, selling it to other ranchers, and the fields had a chance to bounce back until spring, when I bought vaccinated, dewormed calves. It was a pretty mindless operation, other than moving the herd occasionally, keeping salt blocks put out, checking on the stock tanks, scraping out the building, and watching the fences. Jamie and Gloria finally decided that the life was too much for them. They had a nice fat account in the bank and decided to take it to the Texas coast to retire. After they moved out, I sat down with paper and pencil to figure out where all my time was going. I really wasn't doing too badly, except for the chickens. They were a black hole. I sold off quite a few hens and had some fresh chicken dinners. I kept a half-dozen brooders for eggs. I didn't keep any roosters so that I could control the size of the flock. 3 hours each morning went toward running the fence and checking it. 3 hours a day on the cattle. I spent 2 hours on the tractor tending the garden. It was a full day, and come harvest, I'd need some help. As it was, I had my daily fresh salad and plenty of fresh vegetables. The problem was, I didn't have any free time to do the laundry or take care of the house. Damn it, I needed a housekeeper again. I made up a couple of ads on 3x5 cards, then took them into Copper Springs to stick on the board at the diner and the grocery store. It was a pretty simple ad. Cook, housekeeper, gardener needed for a small ranch. Live-in. $45,000 a year. Self-insured. Call for details. Then I left my cell number so I could be reached while out working. I didn't get any hits for a week, so I went down to the diner to have some lunch and ask about my ad. Why isn't anyone calling? Aren't there any farmers' widows around that need a job? The waitress stared at me like I was crazy. Mister, nobody in their right minds is going to trust that ad. It's promising too much money, so everyone figures it's a scam to get them into a brothel or something. I snorted. No, it's the real thing. I own Irene's old place up at the north end of town. I've got cattle, chickens, and a big-ass garden that I'm going to need a lot of help with. I don't have enough hours in the day to tend to my chores and keep the place clean too. If anyone asks, tell them to drive on up and see. I run the fence every morning, tend the cattle, cultivate the garden, and take care of the chickens all by myself. I cut back the chickens a lot, 'cause it's just me. I figure if I need more birds, I can buy a pullet or two and invite the older birds to a chicken dinner or two. Interested in a job? She stood there with her hands on her hips and grinned at me. Well, ain't you just the real thing? I'll pass the word around. I had my burger and fries, then went to the market for a few things. Back at the ranch, I let a few things slide to do some inventories. I needed crushed shell and grain for the birds, 40 salt blocks, a few bags of lime, and a case of grease cartridges. I got that ordered, then went out to check on the animals' food and water. I got the manure scraped up the next day. Hell, it took so long to do, I might just start doing it every other day to save time. The building hardly got used except during thunderstorms. I'd have to think about closing it off until bad weather showed up. A few sunshades over barren parts of the property would do just as well, if not better. I had to haul in dirt occasionally to fill in around the stock tanks. I put in another order for the lumber and screws I'd need to put up the sunscreens before I forgot. I had just finished my walk around the fence and gotten back to the house when I heard car horns. I washed up and went out to see who it was. I didn't recognize them, but two women waved from their car. I waved back and walked up. They stood up with smiles. "Hi, I'm Evelyn and this here's Emma. We're here about the ad." Wow. Two at once. They looked like farm wives, strong, with weather-lined faces. They appeared to be not much older than I was. "Come on in. I'll start a pot of coffee." They followed me in the back door, looking everywhere. "Bathroom's through there if you need it," I said, pointing to the washroom. I started the percolator with a fairly strong batch. I got out the cream, sugar, and cups while the coffee worked. When it was done, I poured 3 cups and invited them to sit. "You sure surprised me when 2 of you showed up. How come?" "Safety in numbers," they both said, looking a little uncomfortable. "Well, you see, we've both been widows for a few years and moved in together to keep the costs down. We were wondering if you might want to hire the both of us." I leaned back thinking. Then I grinned. "I think that'd work just fine." Thanks for watching. Could you have survived like he did? Let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more.